Hi everybody! Today we're going to be working in the Alice in Wonderland colouring book by Jasmine Becket-Griffith because I've chosen Jasmine as my kind of theme of the month or sort of artist of the month this month for August. And we are going to be using the Crayola Twistables coloured pencils because earlier on I was watching a video by Colour and Collage with Ems on YouTube, and she'd done a really cute picture just using Crayola Twistables, and she said they're super fun to use and she recommended them just for a little bit of relaxation kind of colouring. So I thought, yeah, I've got some of those and I'd like to give that a try. So I found a pretty simple picture in here that I figured I could use these Crayola Twistables on, and the one I've chosen to actually colour, if I can find it, here we are, is this one here. You can see there I've already had a little bit of a play around this morning and it was pretty fun, like Emma said, so yeah, that was going really well. I can't quite get them to blend or layer on each other quite as well as Emma seems to do, so I've tried to figure out my own little way of kind of using them, and I think I've got it working pretty well. So I thought today I would show you how I was making those work. Just for a little bit of fun and relaxation with a pretty simple picture there. I thought I'd just show you how I was using these pencils and we could have a little bit of fun with it. So I'll zoom us in and we'll get started. There we go, I've zoomed us in a little bit closer so we can have a little bit of a better look at how I was actually coping with these pencils. And yeah, they are called Crayola Twistable pencils, but they do seem to behave more like a crayon, I've found. They're not so easy to blend or layer, or I don't find them really easy to blend or layer anyways. So the way I've tried to use them is to go really graphic with my shading and not really try to blend or layer. I think I did it in a couple of places, just layering the same pencil over itself to give a more kind of deeper colour. But yeah, that's the first thing I would say. They do behave more like a crayon. They are, however, erasable. I have found they are erasable. I found that out on her dress here because one of the colours I tried to use was the darkest blue that I have in my set. The set I have, as I showed you, is the 50 set. And as far as I can tell, the pencils don't have any names or numbers or anything on them unless you actually write your own and stick it on with a piece of tape or something. So I haven't actually gone ahead and swatched those because I'm not that organised to actually write numbers on all these pencils and do a little swatch sheet. So I tried this blue, which is the darkest blue. And as I'm colouring Alice as the traditional kind of Alice in Wonderland with the blue dress and the blonde hair, just for this picture. It's not something I usually do. I usually go kind of out of the wheelhouse. But I tried with this dark blue and I was pretty disappointed. I'll just show you here. Yeah, I was pretty disappointed that this dark blue is not really that dark at all. The pencils themselves, they're not super pigmented because, as I said, they are kind of more crayon than pencil, but I did find out once I tried to go in with that dark blue, and I was a bit disappointed that wasn't really dark enough for my shadows there, but I did find out that they are erasable. You can see there. We've erased that dark blue pretty much. There's still a little hint of it, but enough to be able to work on top there. So I would say they're more along the lines of kind of erasable crayons than actually being pencils. But again, they are pretty quick and fun to do. As I've said, I've been going for this kind of more graphical style, so not really many layers or much worrying about blending or shading. So I'll show you how I was going about doing what I have been doing this morning, and it has been pretty fun so far. I'll start with her hair, because I do love to colour hair, so I started with her hair this morning, and I'll show you the colours that I have been using for her hair. Unfortunately, they don't have names or numbers, as I said, so I'll just show you. These are the colours that I've been using here. I'm using a kind of light grey, which I do like to use whenever I colour blonde hair, to kind of take the edge off that yellow and make it look not so much like straw or the bright yellow, just make it look more of a blonde colour. I have a kind of a goldeny yellow there. I have the light yellow and this dark brown for the shadows. I just went straight in with a dark brown. The black isn't really a dark black, so I'm trying to keep that just for the areas where I do want a little bit of extra oomph in my shadows there. But I would suggest, if you don't actually put your own names and numbers on there and do a little swatch sheet, to have a spare piece of paper, as I have there. You can see I've been testing out all the different colours. Just have a piece of scrap paper so you can test what the colours actually look like before you lay them down. I would suggest that as being quite a good thing to do. So we're starting with her hair, first with the dark brown, and I will show you before I do go on, the way that you bring out the point with these crayons or pencils is to twist the end. That's why they're called twistables. You twist this end here and you can see the point is coming out down that bottom end there, and you can bring it back in by twisting the other way. I think there is probably a few ways you could actually sharpen them, but I'm just trying to use them kind of chunky as they are and kind of turn the pencil a little bit when I want to get a sharper edge. But I'm trying to be a lot looser with my colouring to have a bit more fun and not feel so much pressure with it sometimes. So I'm just leaving the pencils chunky as they are. I think that's what Emma suggested in her video as well. So yeah, I do think there are ways to sharpen them, but I'm not really going in for that at the moment. I would suggest not really twisting out too much of the point because they're likely to break. There wouldn't be anything actually holding that point there. So I try to keep them fairly short. There are one or two colours I found, especially this darker yellow here that I was using for the hair. They're a little bit loose. So if you're colouring and putting pressure onto the point, it does tend to go back into the pencil. But I figured I'll cross that bridge when I come to it and just try not to press too hard on that pencil. But that can happen sometimes. They can just keep going back up inside the pencil. I think one way I've coped with that in the past is to get the pencil down to about this sort of length here and then wrap some tape around just to hold that point in there until I've worn it down far enough to need to unwind the tape and kind of sharpen the pencil again, so to speak. But yeah, that's another thing that I have noticed. Some of them are a little bit loose and they do tend to go back up inside the pencil if you do press too hard. And as I said, I have tried colouring with these before, and the way I found to use them and get them to look pretty good is not to try to blend or layer them, because that doesn't seem to work super well, at least for me. I don't know if any of you out there do know how to blend or layer them, and if so, then yeah, I welcome the tips. For her hair, I was adding in a few little strand lines with this dark brown, just to give a little bit more of that kind of feathery sort of hair kind of texture. And the brown is the darkest colour that I'm using, so I was starting in with that first, just to kind of map out, I suppose, where I actually want these strand lines to be going and give myself a kind of basic idea of what I want to have going on. I am trying to keep the white, or this paper is kind of off-white, but I'm trying to keep the paper showing through in places as highlights. I'm trying not to bring in that gel pen too much. I have used it, as you can see, I have used it in a few little places, but I'm trying to keep that to a fairly bare minimum, I would say. I'll just do a few strands with this brown, this darker brown. Unfortunately, I can't, as I said, tell you exactly which pencil this is, as there is no names or numbers. So I can't really say. Yeah, I'll put those down in the description, because yeah, there's nothing to put in the description. There is no name and numbers as far as I can tell, just the colours. So it's just something to play with, I think, and maybe find your own little combinations. But this is how I was getting her hair working fairly nicely, I thought. I'm trying to press a little bit harder in the areas that I want to be a little bit darker, like in here towards her parting there. Obviously with the pencils, they do tend to creep back up into the barrel, then yeah, that's not really an option, because your point will be disappearing back up inside the pencil. But yeah, I was trying to press a lot harder in the shadowy areas, or maybe go over with the same pencil, go over itself a few times to get that colour looking pretty dark. Such as inside here, where her hair would be pretty dark with not many highlights in there, and the shadow of her face. It is kind of a 3/4 view, so I've got my light coming from the left there. Not that I'm worrying too much about being really realistic or anything with this. Going in now with the kind of golden yellow here, and adding a little bit of that colour. And this is one that does tend to creep back inside the pencil. If you do press too hard directly down onto the point, it does creep back up inside the pencil. So I'm just going over a little bit of the brown. It's not really layering super well, but I'm not being too particular to go with the blending or anything like that. mainly because it is hair, so we do want it to look kind of as if there are lots of different hair strands there coming together to make these locks of hair. So we do want it to look kind of fluffy, I suppose is the word. So I'm trying to bring in that kind of strokes for the hair. I'm pressing harder in the little shadowy areas, and you can see there that the point has crept back up inside the barrel of the pencil. So yeah, this one, I'm going to mark it with tape. I think this one is pretty terrible for having that point go back up inside the barrel of the pencil. Yeah, I think I really need to mark that one. That's the darker yellow. Here we have this kind of lemon yellow one I was also going in with, and the main body of her hair I was doing with this lemon yellow, and then going over the top with the lighter grey just to dull down that yellow colour and make it look hopefully not quite so like straw. But yeah, the main tip I would give for using these pencils is to not worry too much about the blending and shading. I will show you later on how I've done the shading, keeping the areas of shading pretty graphic and not trying to blend in too much. I think that works a lot better rather than struggling away with trying to figure out how to actually blend or layer them. I'm not much for layering anyway. It's not really, I don't really have the patience to do lots and lots of layering. Which is why doing something so quick and easy like this is, yeah, it's a lot more up my alley. Once I'd done all those colours, the brown and the 2 shades of yellow, I was going over with this light grey. This is the lightest grey that I have in the 50 set. And I was going over, again, using that kind of hair stroke sort of texture, I suppose. And as I found with crayons, the same kind of thing. It's better just to work with what they are, embrace the crayons for what they are, not bother too much with trying to blend or layer. Well, that's the way that I found works for me anyways. Of course, yeah, feel free, and I would definitely encourage the experimenting and playing around and seeing if you can find what works for you. I have left, or tried to leave the paper coming through there to give the highlights, but as usual when I'm colouring hair, it's probably one of the main reasons I do love to colour hair. I bring in the white gel pen. It is quite hard to work on top of these with the white gel pen. They are fairly waxy. I think that they are kind of a cross between a crayon and a pencil, so they're very, very waxy. And it is fairly hard to bring in that white gel pen, but I have in a few little places brought that in, given my customary kind of white highlights. Not so many on this side of her head anyways, because the light would be coming from the opposite side. And there we go, that's how I was doing her hair. On this little bit further down here, I have taken some extra strand lines and put them all the way through the length there, because that is a pretty short length. I haven't done that so much here on top of her head because this is a lot longer length, and my lines would probably be a little bit wobbly and it wouldn't look as good. But down here I have put in these extra strand lines down the middle here. I have just drawn those in with the brown pencil. And yeah, as you can see here, the layering probably wouldn't work super well, not in my experience anyway. It does tend to get kind of a little bit sort of blobby. You get the dots of the actual wax as you do when you're using crayons. So I try and keep to just the one layer and just keep it fairly graphic. And that's the way I've kind of made the crayons or the pencils work for me. They're not crayons, they're pencils, but they behave a lot more like crayons, as I said. That was how I was doing her hair with those colours there. I'll move on now and maybe do a little bit of her skin to show you the colours I was using for that and how I was making that shading sort of work for me. These are the colours I've picked out that I think were working for her skin. We can see here I've done a tiny little bit of the skin on her arm there. We have a kind of tannish brown, which I've used for the darkest shadows. And we have 2 sort of light skin tones. This one is slightly darker, but I've come in along the edge of the tan brown there. And the other one is really light. I'm not sure that will be showing up on camera, but the other skin tone is really light. And I've kept the shadows there fairly graphic. This is a method that I think works quite well for using these pencils. I'll show you a little bit. Where shall I go? Let's do her chin here. I'm starting with the darkest colour. I do seem to find that works kind of the best, again, when doing this sort of graphic sort of shading. And with that brown, the tan brown, I'm going along the main areas of shadow, which would be under her chin here, around her hand there, where that would be casting a shadow, and down the side of her hair, where we'd also have a little bit of a shadow. Then the slightly darker skin tone coming along the edge, not really worrying too much about trying to blend, because I know that, yeah, it's really quite difficult to blend them. As I said, if anybody's got any tips or tricks for that, then I would be all ears, because I haven't really figured out a very good way to blend them without maybe bringing in any solvent or anything like that. Maybe you could use Vaseline or baby oil or something like that to blend them. I don't know. I don't really use solvents to blend my pencils too often, but yeah, that's the kind of idea. Keeping the areas fairly kind of graphic like that, and not bothering too much with the blending. I'm just going over the whole area with the lightest colour there to maybe attempt a little bit of blending. And this is the slightly darker skin tone, just to see if that would work. I'm not entirely sure. No, I don't think that would work too well for blending. The black. Let the black go over there. The black is going over very, very slightly. See, the layering is not the best, but we can get a tiny little bit of the black coming in there for a little bit of extra shadow. But again, because we're going another layer over the top, we're getting those kind of dots or speckles of the wax, which isn't the best. So yeah, maybe that's not such a good idea. But let's try shading her face a little bit, again with the darker tan first, along this edge of her face, trying to keep the areas of shadow fairly kind of graphic, rounding off the shapes. Trying to keep it fairly simple. I'm going over this area quite a few times just to try and build up the colour, going over with the same colour pencil, trying to build up the colour a little bit. Not entirely sure how well this would work, not really being able to blend, but we'll see. We'll see how we go here. Because usually I would bring in the shading in the eye socket here. So maybe let's just round that off, make it into a really graphic shape. I've never really coloured a face before with these Crayola Twistables, so this is all new to me, and yeah, experimenting here as per usual, just seeing if this kind of thing would work. Kind of keeping the shading really simple, in a comic book style maybe. Exaggerating here the shading a little bit, I think. I'm not entirely sure I'll be able to bring in any blushy cheeks here. We can go underneath our mouth. Let's come in with that darker skin tone around the edges of these shadows like we did on her neck. Oops, try and keep on camera. I'm trying to keep these shapes fairly smooth. Kind of screen print kind of effect maybe. Keeping the colours fairly separate, as we've tried blending, and yeah, it doesn't work super well. So we'll try and keep the colours fairly separate, as if we are kind of screen printing this picture. Should we try bringing in a little bit of pink for her cheeks? Let's see what pinks we have. I found a nice pinky colour here. It does seem pretty loose on the end there though, so I'm thinking this one might be one of those that does tend to creep back inside the barrel of the pencil, but I'm going to try bringing in some blushy cheeks. Maybe just a little hint of them there. Again, keeping that rounded shape. And then bringing in the lighter flesh tone. Let's see what that looks like. I'm not entirely sure that's working, but we'll go with it. I'm committed now, I suppose. I could go in any race, but we're doing this for fun anyway. We're just finding out how these pencils actually work. Let's bring that pink into her eyelids. Yep, that pink has disappeared back inside the barrel of a pencil there. So yeah, this is another one fairly loose where the colour does disappear inside the pencil. How are we looking? Let's have a look. Not entirely sure that's working, but we'll see how we look once I've done the whole face. There would be my usual white gel pen probably around here. So we're definitely not going for something realistic. I suppose she might be looking a little bit kind of pop art. Maybe that's the kind of effect we're going for here. We're having a shadow behind her hand here because, as I said, my light is coming from the left. We want this side of her face to be lighter, so there will be more of that kind of darker skin tone colour rather than this tan. But I do want to bring out her eyelid there. Make sure we do have a little bit of definition there. You can actually bring a little bit of shading in with the pencil by easing off your pressure. I'll show you there. If you ease off the pressure, you can grade or gradient that shading. It's probably the word, a little bit. Like that. We do want to have a bit of shading coming into her eye socket there. Probably more towards her actual nose. It's kind of hard to tell on Jasmine's pictures, I will say that. How to do the noses. Maybe something like that. So we'll shade off into the middle there, ease off on the pressure to give a little bit of a gradient to our shading. Try and blend in the pencil strokes a little bit. Okay, let's re-dial out our pink there, and I might actually go ahead and put some tape on there. I've just popped a little bit of washi tape onto the edge of the pink there. I do have my washi tape out. I have a plan for these cups and saucers down the bottom, but let's see if that holds out our pink, keeps that out of the barrel a little bit longer maybe. I'm going to come in with some blushy cheeks here, coming out from that dark skin tone. Okay, into that lighter skin tone. And let's try easing off the pressure as we're coming into this kind of apple of her cheeks here. And we're going to ease off the pressure there to make it look as if her skin has a little bit of a highlight going on there. I'm going to just fill in this area in the shadow of her eye socket. That's all going to be filled in with this lighter skin tone. I'm just bringing this lighter skin tone here where we left off the pressure a little bit on our pencil. And that seems to be a way that maybe you could get them to blend. I'm going to keep these colours in the shadows with the fairly graphic lines, I think, and then maybe into the middle of her forehead I'll try easing off the pressure and giving her more of a natural highlight in the middle when I bring in that lighter skin tone. Just going over and darkening this side because this is the darkest side of her face here. I'm going to leave a little bit of a highlight down the middle of her nose. I'm trying to do a kind of more natural highlight like we did on her little cheeks there. To leave a highlight down the middle of her nose. This sort of area here, we have a bit of a highlight going on. And I want to try and blend that in a little bit as we did on her cheeks. So maybe lighten off our pressure. Hopefully that light skin tone is actually showing up there. I'll boost the colours in editing if we're not showing up. But I just wanted to give the kind of idea of how I'm keeping the areas of colour kind of graphic and separate. Apart from in these areas where I'm trying to blend out the highlights a little bit more. I'm just going over each colour kind of with itself a little bit just to make that area of colour a little bit flatter. But as you can see just there, we are getting those kind of blobs of wax that we do get with the crayons. I'm just bringing in a burnisher pencil here. This is a Derwent burnisher. That was a tip I had when using crayons. You can use a burnisher or a blender pencil to kind of smooth the colours out. And I'm not really trying to blend these together. I'm just making sure that these areas of colour are fairly smooth. Okay, I'm going to call it there for a face, I think. I'll bring in a little bit of the white gel pen there to show that this is the edge of her nose. Again, keeping with that kind of graphic, maybe screen printed look. A couple of white highlights along the edges of our eyelids there as well, I thought might work. Okay, while we're on her face, I'll just do her eyes here by coming in with the light grey. Again, doing the thing of easing off the pressure. But we want to make sure there's a shadow under her eyelid there. So yeah, I'm pressing quite hard with the light grey and then easing off a little bit just to give a little bit of shading to that eyeball shape there. Going to come into our little tear ducts with our pink, the one that we've taped, and then add a little bit of that pink again to her eyelids. And if we're keeping traditional here, I'm going to give her the blue eyes. So I have 3 blues here. The dark blue, as I showed you earlier, that one isn't very pigmented at all, and I didn't think it was working too great. So I've got a kind of medium blue, which I'm using for my shadows, and I've got a couple of shades of the lighter blues there that I was using to shade her dress. I did actually come in with the black, I think, a little bit on her dress, just to add a little bit more depth to my shadows, because this blue isn't that dark. I'm just doing a few strokes leading out from the pupil there to give a little bit of a texture to the eye. I might try coming in with the black as I did on the dress. We're getting a tiny little bit of extra shadow there, just under that eyelid. Maybe I'll extend it all along the rest of her eye. Bring a tiny touch of that yellow in there. I think this is the lightest lemon yellow. Just the bottom of her eye where the light will be catching it. My light is coming from this direction, so I'll put in my usual big highlight and the little one and shine lines. And there we go. And those are the same blues that I actually used for her dress. Using that kind of mid-tone blue for the shady areas, going in with maybe a tiny bit of black over the top. Originally I did come in with that very dark blue, but that wasn't really coming in as being dark enough, so I did leave that one in the end, erased all that, and just worked with the medium and the light blue. And these blues are fairly close together in colour, so the shadows are not that kind of defined anyways down in these kind of shadowy areas, but we can ease off the pressure to give a little bit of a difference in the colours there, coming into the more lighter areas. A little bit of black for a shadow under her collar, behind her hair. There we go. And for these white bits on her dress, can we see those? Yep, these white bits on her dress. I was just shading those with the light grey and then easing off the pressure when we're going away from the shadowy areas. I'll just show you on this edge of the sleeve here what I did for that one. I was pressing fairly hard on the very edges and then lessening off the pressure coming into the middle, just to give a little bit of shading to that grey there, make it look as if her sleeve is rounded, because these areas would be in the shadow going further away from you. I'll just do her lips and show you how I do those on the camera, and then I'll go ahead and finish off Alice herself, which fingers crossed shouldn't take super long to actually do because it is fairly quick. And then my idea is to bring in some washi tape for these cups on the teapot, maybe shade them with a grey, or maybe bring in a darker grey to add a little bit of shading, and then go over the top with the washi tape. The same washi tape that I used on my Lana Green picture. I have the little sunflower one. I also have this one which is white with kind of little gold spots, and I thought maybe for the cups the sunflower tape, and then for the saucers this little spotty one. See how that turns out, just for a little bit of fun. So for her lips anyways, I've picked out this kind of browner pink here, and I'm going to go with the pink that we've already been using for her cheeks and kind of in her eyes there. So for this browner pink, I'll go into the outside edges and underneath the top lip. edges of her lips there. And then underneath her top lip, because the effect we're trying to give is the same as we've got going on her sleeve there, with the dark being in the edges, lightening off when it comes towards the middle. So this is the pink that we've already been using. It's slightly lighter. And we want the highlights of her lips to be sort of in the middle, but more towards this left side because that's where we have our light coming from. I wonder if we can bring in the brown that we had for her hair there over the top to... Yeah, the layering. The layering is not brilliant there, but I wanted a little bit of a darker colour. Okay, that'll do, I think. And I'm going to bring in the highlights on this side because that's the side we do have our light coming from. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead now and just finish off Alice, the rest of her hair, her skin and her dress there, and then catch up with you again once I've finished with that. And I'll show you the colours I was using for this background here. I wanted to go for red, kind of maroon red for the background, and I picked out a couple of nice colours for that. And then we'll have a go doing these teapots with the washi tape. And we'll be pretty much done. So hopefully a fairly quick one today, just playing about with these pencils. But I'll catch up with you once I've finished off Alice. Okay, just before I go on there, I realised that we do actually have a little bit of a headband going on here across her hair. So I'm going to fill this in with the blue, and you may see that I've made a little bit of a happy accident there. I was filling in this part of her hair here, and that is actually hair. That is not a hairband, so I'm just going to go ahead and fill in the actual headband with the blues that we were using for her dress and for her eyes. And I'm trying to give a little bit of a texture to this, some sort of weave to the fabric of this ribbon. So I'm pressing quite hard and keeping all my strokes going in the same direction and following the direction of the ribbon there around her hair. And I'm pressing quite hard in these shadowy areas, easing off as we're getting towards the middle. And because I've had to erase, the paper is a little bit rougher here, but I'm sure I can forgive myself there for that. And I'm just going to bring in a slightly lighter blue, carry on the same kind of texture idea, fading off into the middle. We're going to make this ribbon look as if it's got a little bit of a weave to it, but it is actually shiny there. And we're going to go over this part with the brown that we're using for the darkest parts of her hair, and just make sure that this part is kind of shaded in the shadows because we want to cover all that blue that we put in by accident there. As I said, the paper is slightly rougher because we did have to erase there, but I don't think it should make super much difference. I'm just using the same colours that we used for her hair there. And then the light grey just to dull down those yellows. There we go, all fixed. I think once her hair is actually all done, we shouldn't be able to notice that super much. I'll cross my fingers and I'll catch up with you again once I've finished Alice. There we go, I've gone ahead and finished off Alice there, just keeping to the same colours that I showed you, the same kind of techniques. I have gone ahead and blended her skin with the burnisher pencil just to make the colours a little bit smoother. They're not exactly blended, probably a little bit more blended than I did on her face, but I think she's looking pretty good so far. For this part of the background here behind our Alice, I wanted to go for a kind of a deep dark red colour. And what I ended up finding in with the Crayola Twistables, these two colours here. This one is more of a maroon, kind of a dark sort of burgundy colour maybe. This one more of a magenta, but I think once they're working together then it works quite well. That's what I've used for the background over here and under her arm there. Once they're actually down on the paper, they don't look as if there's that much difference between the colours, so I think it works quite well. This is, we can get that in frame, this is just going in straight away with the darker colour, sort of a wine, maybe burgundy or maroon. And as the colours are pretty close together, I wasn't really worried too much about the blending here. I was just putting in a few bits of shadows, pressing quite hard here, because I want the background to be more of a solid, flat colour maybe. Hasn't quite worked out super flat on the other side of the page, but yeah, I'm going to go with it anyway. It's the right kind of colour that I did want. And I think it's working pretty well. So I'll just do this side of the background to show you how I was actually doing that. As I was saying for the tea set down the bottom there, I was thinking of going in with some washi tape with maybe a bit of a floral pattern. I don't actually have one with blue flowers on. I think blue flowers might work quite nicely. But then again, maybe that might be a bit too much blue with Alice's dress and the headband. So we're just going to go with the yellow and the gold, I'm thinking. Maybe that will bring in the blonde of her hair again. Just having this red in the background as a bit more of a pop of colour. So I'm pressing quite hard here, and as you can see, well, hopefully see on the tape there, that these colours are looking fairly close together once they're actually down on the page. So I don't think there's much need for any fancy blending or being too particular about it, as long as the colour looks fairly flat. And this magenta does seem to be wandering back off into the barrel of the pencil, because I am pressing pretty hard here to try and get some nice flat colour down. We do seem to be keeping with the primary colours here. It's blue, yellow and magenta. It's a little bit of a primary colour palette we've got going on, which isn't intentional. It just seems to be what seems to be working together. I'm just trying to give this a few layers to try and get that colour pretty flat. I will come in with maybe with a burnisher pencil, try and get the flat colour going on here in the background. Then we'll move on to our tea set, our tablecloth. I was thinking of having this tablecloth be white, so I was just shading that with this light grey. Just getting some shadows behind the crockery here, and then blending off into the lighter areas by loosening up our pressure, lightening our pressure behind the pencil, so we get less intense colour moving into the lighter areas. And yeah, I'm not too worried about the pencil strokes. I've kind of come to the realisation it's pretty much inevitable, so I'm just working with it, letting these pencils just be themselves. And I've missed a little bit of her finger there. There's always something. Bit of a shadow behind her arm. And the shadows on the crockery I'm going to be doing in a slightly darker grey, I think. There is a darker grey in the little set, because we want that to be showing through the washi tape. We can make that work. That will look quite nice, I think. I don't want just plain crockery. I want to have a little bit of a pattern going on there with the crockery. So let me find the darker grey. Here's our darker grey. So I'm just going to add a few little bits of shadows to these cups and saucers and the teapot. Alright, time to see what we can make happen with this washi tape. I want to put these sunflowers on the teapot, so let's see if we can make this work, which should have some nice lines to be following here. Just gonna go back over and get back some of that line art we lost a little bit, just to make sure we're in keeping with the rest of the picture with this big line art we have going on. And as I'd hoped, yes, you can still see that shading through the washi tape, so that does help. To give the teapot a little bit of form there. But I do think I'm going to go maybe with the spots for the cups and saucers, because that's not so much of a hassle to be matching up, I don't think. What we can do as well to bring in with the rest of the picture is add a few little white highlights, which are not super noticeable, but does help to bring it into line with the rest of the picture where I've put in my usual white highlights. Let's see if we can make these spots work for the cups and saucers. I'm hoping so. Just adding a few little white gel pen dots here to maybe show there's a little bit of a lacy or embroidery texture going on with this tablecloth. I just thought it was looking a little bit too plain, but seeing as I'm going to bring in some collage pattern for this outside here, I don't want to make it too busy. I might just come in with some extra shading on these cups and saucers on top of the washi tape this time. Okay, that looks a lot better. And yeah, I know I was supposed to be keeping this one really simple, but yeah, I really want to be putting some collage in the background there. It's just the idea I've got stuck in my head now. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll cut out the rest of this background here, these kind of four corners and the frame around the outside of the page. I see I haven't really thought this idea through, because in my mind's eye I can see a nice pattern here in this bit of frame around the outside, but Some of you might have spotted the problem that I might run into here, and that's because Alice here is in an oval in the middle of the page and she's not actually touching the frame. So what I'm going to have to do is cut out this whole area in the middle, cut out Alice in her circle or oval there, and once I've stuck my paper in behind to fill in that page, I will cut out Alice and stick her back in the middle. So here we go with my smaller cutting mat. I really do need to give it a good clean because it's looking a bit grungy now, but I'm just going to slip that in behind Alice there. And I'm going to cut out this whole part in the middle of the page. And this part would be similar to where I showed you about replacing the whole of a colouring page background. But in this case, this is what happens when our main character is not actually touching the edge of the frame. It's still doable, especially as we have this nice simple shape here. But what we're going to need to do is cut out the whole of the inside of this frame. Once we've cut out our whole area in the middle of the frame here, what we're going to need to do is cut out Alice in her oval there and stick her onto the background paper. As I said, this paper is really thick. It's quite a struggle to actually get through the paper here. Alright, our Alice is all cut out now, as you see there, nothing left in the middle of the page. I have actually cut Alice out separately. There she is inside her oval. We're going to be sticking her back onto the page when we're done. But first of all, I'm going to go around and neaten these edges with the good old metallic Sharpie, like I do like to do, just to make things look a little bit neater. I've slipped some scrap paper behind there, just in case we do go over onto the page underneath, because it's not an exact science, especially with me not being the neatest. But yep, go. I'm just going to go around the edges of Alice's frame as well, just so she matches in nicely. And of course, neaten off the edges because, again, I'm not the neatest. I'm going to trim off the edges of this paper here so that we get this blue bit down the middle of the page, actually in the middle of our page. So I'm going to chop off a few stripes on each side just to make sure we have that bit down the middle and we have this nice kind of wallpaper pattern for our four corners. Okay, now our paper's trimmed a little bit more to size. I'm going to stick that underneath the page behind there so we can have that as a background for our Alice. And that will just be with the normal glue stick. Nothing fancy. So I'm going to pop some scrap paper there, flip our page over. The inside edge is always a doozy. Flip her over. And I'm going to make sure we get glue all around all the edges that we're going to want to be sticking down, especially this inside edge here. It's always a little bit awkward. But get as far into the spine of the book as you can. I've popped some glue around the edge of the actual paper that we're using as well. So now we'll flip our page back over. Always awkward. Going to flip it back over. And make sure we're stuck, especially around this inside edge. As I said, that's always a little bit awkward. Now we take our Alice, just popping her on top of some scrap paper and make sure that she's glued. We are losing the title of the next page, as we see there. I'm not too fussed about that though. We pop her down. Pop her down as close to the middle as we can. In another sheet of clean scrap paper, we're just going to press her down. There we go, and that's how you would collage in an image, just replacing the background if your image actually doesn't touch the frame. It's a lot easier if your image actually does touch the frame, as I've said, but you can make it work if it doesn't. It's just a lot more awkward. Bringing in the trusty white gel pen, just these pieces where we are a little bit ragged around the edges, we can disguise that. Some sparkle lines for this metallic frame. And there we go. As I said, a little bit more complicated than I originally envisioned, but I am calling her there, so I'll zoom her out and we'll take a bit of an overview of the whole picture. Alright, I've zoomed us out there so we can see the whole picture, and I'm pretty happy with how she's turned out. A little bit more complicated than I did originally envision, as I said. But I think she's worked out quite nicely. I do like the way that pattern is working in the background, kind of like wallpaper in a tea room is what I was thinking of, kind of like an old-fashioned tea room with some flowery wallpaper going on there. I think it fits in quite well with the yellow and blue colours as well, which ties in quite nicely with our Alice with the blonde hair and the blue dress there. I love the washi tape on this crockery at the bottom. I think that's worked really nicely. The only part I'm not maybe too happy with is the way her face has turned out. It's kind of hard to figure out the way the shadows would fall on her face and turn it into these graphic shapes, but it doesn't look too bad, I don't think. So all in all, yeah, pretty happy with how she's turned out, and she was super fun and pretty quick. Pretty fun treating the Crayola Twistables a bit like crayons and not really trying to blend or layer them too much because I know that it's not going to work super well. The colours are not the most pigmented, not too bright, which is another reason I chose this kind of subdued, kind of pastel colour, vintagey looking wallpaper for the background there to try and make these colours look a little bit more brighter with the background being so soft colours. I think it's kind of worked. She does look a little bit brighter with that paper behind there. And not quite so simple because the picture itself was a pretty simple picture. That was one of the reasons that I did actually choose it. It was a pretty simple picture. I knew the twistable pencils were kind of chunky and yeah, you can probably sharpen them some ways, but I didn't really want to mess around trying to get little sharp points on them. I just wanted to play with them as is. So yeah, that's why I chose a pretty simple picture. But with that frame around the outside, that does make it look a little bit less simple, I think, which is a good thing. Yeah, definitely a good thing. So all in all, yeah, pretty fun to use. If you treat them like maybe erasable crayons, something along those lines, or something that's fun to play with, not great for layering or blending unless there's a secret tip to it that I don't really know. But yeah, quick and fun, and it has been quite an enjoyable day. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed following along, seeing how the twistables actually work on this better paper. As the last time I tried them, it was on Colouring Heaven paper. So there is quite a lot of difference between this thicker paper and the Colouring Heaven paper. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed watching. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Take care, and I'll see you in future videos. Bye!